You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, all of you fiction lovers and loyal listeners literally all over the world. We have something very special for you today. We have a co-author team. Now, BOOKSTORM Podcast has had a few co-author teams before, and we find them to be very special because you're getting not one brilliant brain, but two wove into an amazing fiction story. We have to welcome Quinn and Janie Chang with this amazing book, Phoenix Crown. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're thrilled to have you. Now, I have to give our listeners a little bit of your bios because they're so very interesting. Quinn is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of historical fiction. She's a native of Southern California. She went to Boston University, where she got a bachelor's and a master's degree. Now listen closely, classical voice. How cool is that? Maybe we'll get you at the end to sing something. I don't know. She and her husband now live in San Diego with 3 rescue dogs. And we have Janie Chang, who also writes historical fiction, often with a personal connection because she draws from a family history of 36 generations of recorded genealogy. Another wow. How amazing. She was born in Taiwan, grew up in the Philippines, Iran, and Thailand. There's a story in itself. She has her own accolades and awards because she's had the finalist for the BC Book Prize, Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, Globe and Mail National Bestseller, nominated for International Dublin Literary Award, nominated for Evergreen Award and a Globe and Mail Bestseller. She graduated with a computer science degree and a graduate of the Writers Studio at Simon Fraser University. She lives in the beautiful Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, Canada. Welcome to both of you. What an amazing history behind both of you. And we're thrilled to have you on BOOKSTORM.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, wonderful. Well, Janie and Kate, we like to give the listeners a background on the story. I kind of summarize a little bit what's going on without giving away any spoilers. And if either of you would love to add anything at the end, please be our guest to do so. And, sometimes it's hard not to give away spoilers, but in this situation, that is the case. But it is set against an incredible historic backdrop. And that's one of the things that is such an incredible draw with this story. Now, this novel follows the lives of 2 women in 1906 San Francisco, just before the devastating earthquake and the subsequent fires that destroyed parts of the city. These women faced down racism and extreme misogyny in hero-worthy ways. Gemma is a golden-haired, silver-voiced soprano. I love that description of her, whose career probably needs a little rekindling at this point. She's making a big cross-country move. She's putting a lot on the line. Su Ling is a petite and resolute resident of Chinatown. She is under the authority of her uncle after she's lost her parents, and she has remarkable sewing and embroidery skills, but she's also desperately trying to escape an arranged marriage that her uncle is in the process of negotiating. Now, both women find themselves, along with some other pretty remarkable women and men, working for Henry Thornton. He is a railroad magnate whose extraordinary collection of Chinese antiques include the fabled Phoenix crown, a legendary, beautiful relic that was taken from Beijing's Summer Palace. Now, his patronage gives both women a chance to improve their lives, but it comes unraveled as these other events, including the earthquake and the subsequent fire, begin to tear everybody apart. And then Thornton disappears. Now, years later, we see our characters in Paris at a beautiful costume ball. And lo and behold, the Phoenix crown reappears. At this point, Gemma and Su Ling, they both now have one goal, and that is maybe accountability, maybe justice, but they are united in their purpose. And we see these incredible actions flow from there. So we love this plot. We love the backdrop. And we would love it if you wanted to add anything in terms of the background.
I think you got it beautifully. So let's dive in.
Awesome.
Okay, well, I have to give a little shout out because not only does Bookstorm Podcast love this book, so does Jamie Ford, Marie Benedict, and Victoria Christopher Murray, who are friends of Bookstorm and have been on our show. So let me say for our listeners, thank you to both of you for taking us back to 1906. It wasn't really that long ago. It was a place where women were not respected. They were abused, mistreated, used, rather than ever being offered a real career. Gemma was a singer, Su Ling, a brilliant seamstress, Alice, a botanist. And Alice thought, and I have to quote, "Why did it have to be so hard for talented girls trying to succeed at anything?" She decided, life is not about what is good. It's about survival. The ones who survive are not necessarily good. You showed us something as the reader. There was goodness in all three of these women, and we grew to love them for very different reasons. But how did they, and how do all of us in the real world, even in this year, balance out being good with surviving? Women's rights have come a long way. I don't think we're quite there yet.
I would have to agree with you on that. And it's something that all of our ladies struggle with in the book because they all, and especially when you're coming to the younger characters, they are looking to carve out some independence for themselves, and they all have passions. They all want to build some kind of career. You know, Su Ling is a talented embroiderist. She's looking at that as like her ticket out of the arranged marriage and of Chinatown. We have Gemma, who is looking to her voice to rescue her from her own situation, which is, it has already done once she got from a small town in Nebraska where she got started and got all the way to New York, and she's made herself a career, but she needs to get to the next level. And we have an artist character who comes in later who's also looking to forge her way as an artist. But the thing is that they all have, you know, been somewhat hardened by the fact that it is really difficult to make your way as a woman on your own, and that you have to have a little bit of ruthlessness if you're going to be the only one looking out for number one, because, you know, no one else is doing it for you. And so the balance between, you know, how to be a little bit, you know, tough and ruthless enough to be able to forge that path, but how not to be hardened too much is something that they all struggle with in some way. And then of course you throw a disaster on top, that is, you know, that really will bring out the tooth and claw in everyone. So does really show them what they're made of. And it does really show them too, though, that there are times you are going to have to rely on others if you're going to survive and not just yourself.
It's true what Kate says, because a big theme of this novel is friendships, and in particular, female friendships. And Gemma and Su Ling at first do not seem as though they would naturally form a friendship, but thrown together and with some common goals and discovering that they have more in common from what what they're having to endure, they do become good friends. They do support each other. And the really amazing character in this book is a real one, Alice Eastwood, because she was real. we loved her. She was the head of botany at the California Academy of Sciences during a time when, women were, they were housewives. They were barely allowed to be school teachers. And here she is hiking through the Rockies, picking up plant samples and bringing them back and cataloging them, having plants named after her. So she was like a shining light that our characters could look up to.
I really loved her. And I don't think it's giving a spoiler to say that during the fire, she is desperate to save these plants. But you know what it showed? It showed even in 1900, even when women are not allowed, we still had passion and we still had gifts. And you also showed us that these women banded together. Women are a resource for women back then and even today. Just how you two have written this book together, a resource for each other, banding together and creating something. It's a great message.
Well, we're very lucky that, we have the same agent, we have the same editor as well, which is one of the things that made the writing of this book a little easier. But we've also been really lucky to have a huge collection of, women writers in our lives, also represented by the same agent or just colleagues in the field. The lovely ladies who gave us, cover quotes, the fabulous team that we've got behind this book at Morrow. And it is a real support network, and it is very much a, everyone, waving their pom-poms for each other, everyone lifting up each other. And it is something I don't think I would know how to be without. And, because when you get started, especially in this business as a writer, it can be very solitary. You do your work mostly by yourself, and knowing, after all, building those networks and making those support systems for yourself is the most important thing in the world.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the striking imagery in your story. We see and smell one of the rarest plants in the world, the queen of the night, and it blooms even in the midst of pretty unspeakable tragedy unfolding around it. And there's another poignant scene that I just loved. I actually read the scene over a couple times, where Gemma is using her gift of her voice while all hell is breaking loose around her. And I wanted to ask you, what were you trying to convey about the importance of these beautiful gifts, even in the midst of horror and devastation?
To me, it speaks to what do we value? What do we value as being important, as being symbolic, as being who we are? So there's brightness in the middle of all this tragedy, right? And we found that in researching very dark times, and Kate and I have both written about the world wars, and believe me, it can be pretty depressing when you do that much research on the horrors of war. And the San Francisco earthquake was no picnic either. There were terrible things going on. But, what we found that as writers is you need to include these moments of brightness. Otherwise, is for the readers and for yourself, it's just unrelentingly grim when you're writing about a tragic scene. So I think that when you talk about these beautiful gifts, it is also what do we value? Do we love art? Is that who we are as people?
And it becomes about the fact that beauty is, if it's not going to be valued in a time of tragedy or darkness, when on earth is it going to be? It's beauty, and art is not only for leisure time and for, times of sunshine. In fact, it's what will get us through the dark times. And I think that's something, the whole world had a lesson in during lockdown, was because what got us through lockdown when we couldn't go anywhere? Books got us through. Quality, fabulous television got us through, music got us through. These are, art, that we could, make, or that we could look at. These are the things that helped us get through. These are not just, for all, there's always cuts in funding for people saying, it's like, what is the point of having, art in schools, when we need to be teaching the essentials? Well, art and beauty is also an essential. We can't live without it. And so therefore, we chose a number of things. I mean, the Queen of the Night flower was such a wonderful thing because we already had a botanist in the story. And then we had the idea that the Queen of the Night is one of the most famous operatic roles, and it's a role that Gemma sings. So it was a nice bit of a thematic underlay there for on a number of levels. And, the Phoenix Crown was something we came across as we were looking to see what kind of antiques would be, collectibles for someone with an avid eye to amassing a collection. And we looked at these things and thought, well, these are things that can be bright spots also. And I remember for the senior referencing where, there's a moment where Gemma sings in the middle of the aftermath of the earthquake. I thought back to a story I'd heard from another crisis long pre-pandemic when I think I had read about something where a Juilliard music student had in New York in the days after 9/11 played the violin for hours in an outdoor area where people were treating injuries. And, it said that it was like, it was such a strange experience because for once, they weren't thinking about, how to perfect each technical moment. Is the vibrato good enough? Are you bringing enough, soul to the moment? It was just a matter of, I'm going to spill out music because it's what I have to give in a time of crisis. And it's something that will hopefully comfort the people who hear it. And I don't remember any more specifics about that story, but I never forgot it. And I thought that I gave Gemma a similar moment because, when you are a singer, you have something to give, you have a voice, you have a song, and songs have been one of the ways in which, from the very beginning of time back to caves, people have mourned, people have celebrated, people have tried to fend off the dark.
Absolutely. And, two things I just wanted to raise. The experience was very immersive where these gifts were concerned. It wasn't just you were seeing the flower or hearing the voice, it was all your senses were engaged. And that's why the backdrop was especially neat along those lines because you were immersed and you were engaged. And I loved it. Actually, you did that throughout the story. And it's an experience reading this book. I thought that was really cool. We were
So much. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's
Kristen, you have no idea how much talking about these stories goes on behind the scenes, and that's what we talk about are these books that just draw us in, and we're there. And, you learn something every time.
And also, we always talk before the author comes on because then Kristen and I can talk about all the spoilers that we can't talk about here. So it's a lot of fun. My next question, you may have partially already answered it, but I was really curious about before and after the fire and what the characters' ideas of that what were important in life, how it changed, and maybe how it didn't change. It was specifically interesting that people sought to salvage certain things. For example, the glorious phoenix crown, the queen of the night flower. How about the little bird? That spoke significance to us. It's an artwork of its own, an endearing object, a living thing. It caused the reader to wonder, in a tragic circumstance like that, a life-altering moment, do we change what's important to us? Or do we realize what was so important to us all along? And is it really the crown? Is it really the flower? Is it the bird? Or is it what they stand for?
I think
I
a
think
lot
in a
of it
crisis,
is.
yeah, I think in a crisis, you're certainly going to find out what's really important to you. It might be exactly what you thought it was, or it might not. For one of our ladies who does go back for her pet bird, it's the only thing she has, and that is in terms of a companion. And speaking as someone who adores their dogs, and I have had a house fire, and literally my husband did charge into a room full of smoke in a house that was burning down to grab the dog out of the bedroom and make sure that we got out with him first of all. It's like that's the thing I would charge into danger and for, and that's, it was not a surprise, but therefore when it actually happened, and that is exactly what happened. We went back for the dog, and who is fine, by the way. No, the dog didn't die. And that is exactly what I had Gemma doing as well, because it's your one companion. It is something that is, reliant upon you for survival. So you owe it something. And it also was a plot purpose thing too, because we've all had the thing in a movie or a book where you yell at the heroine for being, oh my God, you are so dumb if you are going to go back and risk running into the bad guy at exactly the wrong moment. And I thought, how do we keep the reader from not thinking she's too dumb to live to do that. And it's like, she has to go back for her bird, because you would risk running into the bad guy to save your pet. You just would. I mean, that's maybe the one thing that you should do, to risk running into the bad guy, but you would do it to save your pet.
And also, I think that the items that our characters choose to save say something about them. So for Alice, the plant samples in the Queen of the Night, that is her life's work, right? That she's trying to rescue there. And she feels that she is saving something that matters not just to her, but for the whole nation and for the science of botany. For Thornton, going back to rescue the Phoenix crown, there may be something mercenary about it, but in a way, that's also his life's work, is amassing a collection, and this is a jewel of his collection. And however ill-gotten it may have been, it matters.
And I guess, we sometimes we like to see the silver lining. Maybe in a catastrophe, that is one good thing that comes out of it, that you exit it with a little clear idea of what matters in life. You showed us that a little bit. Thank you.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, the theme of racism runs very strong throughout your story, and I wanted to broach the subject just for a little bit. Thornton's, he was collecting chinoiserie. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep,
Okay.
chinoiserie.
Okay. And some of those artifacts were looted from Chinese palaces, and he was very intent on possessing them. That was very important to him. And there's a scene where Su Ling reflects on the woman before her who may have worn, some of these artifacts, likely an imperial consort, and even the magnificent dragon rope that he collected. And as her character grew, was she speaking out on behalf of all of those women who have been stripped of the things that were important to them? Do you think that was in the back of her mind?
Well, it was certainly in the back of my mind. Because there were like two major lootings of imperial palaces. One was in the late 1800s and one was in 1900, both around Beijing. And it was all foreign troops who went through. And even as they were very racist in the way they thought about the Chinese in those days, they couldn't help but admire these treasures and these wonderful works of art that were in these palaces that they were looting. There were like auctions going on in the courtyards of all the soldiers piling up these treasures. They were just dumbstruck. There was one account where they just said they couldn't take it in anymore. Like there were just cases and cases of jewels and beautiful embroidered objects and works of art. They just could not believe all these riches. And these have since been dispersed to all corners of the world, private collections and museums. And the government of the People's Republic of China is quite bitter about it. So, and some of it is still around in wonderful museums in Taiwan and in China. So I think that whether or not Su Ling may have been so strongly aware of it, I certainly was aware of what would happen in the decades to come, mourning the loss of these treasures. But she certainly would have thought, who wore this robe? What was she like? Did she suffer when palaces were looted? Was she frightened? That sort of thing. And Su Ling herself, I found, was a really interesting character. When Kate called me up and said, "So, what do you think of setting a story in 1906 earthquake, Chinatown before it burns down?" And I had a quick look to see whether or not we could come up with a Chinese female character who would be interesting. And absolutely, because Su Ling is representative of that first generation of Chinese Americans. Her parents had been brought over for labor. Her mother was trafficked, essentially, but she herself was born in the United States. She was an American citizen. And while she is deeply steeped in the community and culture of Chinatown, she has also been educated by missionaries. So she can see that there are women who have careers, who have more independence, who can marry who they want to, and that sets her up for kind of straddling two cultures And as someone who came from a rather traditional, my parents were kind of traditional, and moving here to Canada, I can definitely, it's not as extreme as what Suline went through, but I can definitely get that feel of negotiating, trying to negotiate two cultures at the same time and trying to be successful in each of them.
Yeah. I would love to see where your characters went after this because they continued to live in two cultures and brought with them all of this growth and all of their reflection on what they had been through. And so I don't know if there is anything in the works, but these two characters, actually four characters, there were four women with a very interesting, arc in their story. And just knowing how they navigated those next several decades, I would love to know. So I'm just putting my 2 cents in.
Hey, do you have
Right.
anything to add to that question? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Janie summed it up beautifully. But it was definitely, even though this wasn't a book about the looting of the old summer palace or these things that had, happened in China, which are still resonating today. It wasn't about that, but at the same time, it felt good to touch on that in this book because we're living at a time where there are more conversations than ever about provenance of objects. Where do museums have the right to display the objects that they have collected, because collected is now a something of a euphemism we have understood for a lot of wholesale theft that went on. And so this conversation is part of the dialogue that is happening now. And the way that there's these crazes for appreciating the art of another culture, there's also now started to be these discussions about, well, what is appreciation and what is appropriation? And so when you have a man like Thornton, and this is quite common in the turn of the century, these robber baron types who had this intense appreciation for the art and artifacts of other cultures, but not a lot of scrupulousness about how they obtained it. It's like, you are appreciating it, yes, but at the same time, you are also taking it from where it rightfully belongs. And is there a way to balance that? Now we're asking, is there a way to balance the appreciation for the artifacts of a different culture with not stripping it from the place where it originated from? And that is, something our characters are not necessarily thinking about because it's not part of the dialogue where they are, but it's something that our readers are aware of as they're reading. So we were aware of it too when we were writing it and thought it would be, we can touch on that even a little bit, even if the story is not technically about them.
Yeah. No,
It's
that's
very
excellent.
important, very. And speaking of artifacts, Janie has a little treat for us here. If you're not watching on YouTube, you're going to want to link in. And can you show us and tell us what you are
Right.
sharing with us?
Okay, so people may want to know, why is the title of the book The Phoenix Crown? And phoenix crowns were worn by Chinese empresses and concubines. And the main feature were bits of blue decoration made from kingfisher feathers. So you can see here, I cannot afford an entire crown, but I was able to purchase some kingfisher feather hair ornaments. So these are bits, the artistry in these is just amazing. As you know, let's see if I can do this and have the webcam focus on it. But it's kingfisher feathers that are cut out and glued on top of, solid thin strips of brass or sometimes gold, and then shaped into these ornaments. And a phoenix crown would be absolutely covered in these. These are just hairpins. And these were actually as expensive as jewels themselves because of the difficulty of collecting the feathers and the artistry required to actually work with them. So when Kate and I go on tour, I've got these like in a little traveling box that's lightweight and doesn't have any glass, and we'll be able to pass them around like show and tell for the people who come to our book events.
I
And that's
think
also
it's
the reason why I know we've had some people ask or, be curious about the fact that, we think of the people who think of the concept of a phoenix as the Western phoenix, which is like red and gold, but the phoenix crown on the cover of the book is this vibrant blue. Well, it's because of the kingfisher feathers, and that blue never fades because it is not a dye, it's not a pigment, it's an optical illusion on the feathers themselves. So that's one of the reasons they were so valued, is because that blue will never fade. And it is reason why it is so, vibrant and beautiful even today.
It's interesting because Thornton kept these for himself for the most part. He tucked them away in a room. He allowed people to see them at certain times of his choosing. And that's such a difference in terms of what we're talking about as far as appreciation versus something else. And I think the something else was going on here with Thornton in terms of, exercising dominion over these things that he, for whatever reason, valued. So that was a cool contrast of you going on the road with those versus Thornton putting everything away for his own viewing pleasure.
Well, in those days, those robber barons were out to prove that they weren't just money grubbing people. They also had culture. So they were funding the arts and opera and artists, and they were collecting chinoiserie, which was very much trendy in those days. Yeah.
That was fascinating. So tune it into YouTube. It is absolutely beautifully precious. It reminds me of porcelain almost. It's hard to believe it's a feather, and the color is inexplicable. So you going on tour with that is going to be a real highlight. It really brings it to life. It has been such a pleasure speaking with both of you. Now, before we let you go, what are you working on next? Anything together again, or what are you doing separately? Give us a couple little clues.
Well, Kate's next, really.
I am an overachiever, and I have another book coming out this year. July 9th, my next book, The Briar Club, comes out. It is a book about an all-female boarding house in early 1950s Washington, D.C. So we are dealing with McCarthyism, the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare, the Cold War, the Korean War, the end of the Women's World War II baseball leagues. There's so much grist in that period, and I really can't wait for this book to hit shelves. Although it's fun to be able to celebrate the Phoenix Crown first before I have to think about that one.
Kate is going to be on tour nonstop for the next 12 months for having two books out. On Saturday, I just handed in the first draft of my next book to my editor. It's called The Fourth Princess, and it's a Gothic novel set in pre-war Shanghai, because I adore Gothic novels. So I wanted to see if I could write one myself. And also pre-war Shanghai is a place and time that I've done a lot of research on. So I was hoping I wouldn't have to dive into too much research in order to write this. But it is about an American woman and a Chinese woman. The American woman is married to a millionaire, and they move into this, mansion that stood deserted for years because someone committed suicide there many years ago. And she hires the Chinese woman as her companion, translator, secretary, and dark secrets are revealed.
Ooh, both of those sound fantastic. You heard it here first, everyone. What's coming? But before you get ready for that, got to pick up the Phoenix Crown. You are going to love it. It's truly a treasure of a historical novel that we can still relate to, that touches us today. Thank you to both of you. And let me just tell our listeners, please connect with Katie Quinn. You can find her on Facebook, X, Instagram. She has a website where you can sign up for her newsletter. And please connect with Janie Chang. You can find her on Facebook, Instagram, website, where she also has a newsletter, and keep up to date with everything that they're doing. And thank you so much for joining us at BOOKSTORM.
Thank you for inviting us. This was so much fun.
These were such great questions, a great discussion. So really, thank you for reading and for appreciating and for having us today.
We loved it. You take care now. Well, Chris, that book really took us into history on a couple different levels. I loved it. I loved even getting a glimpse of the Chinese American experience at the turn of the century, let alone American history woven in there as well. And a little bit of that was eye-opening to me. We know about racism, we hear about racism, but we had a character where we could see in action, these twin difficulties of not only the racism issue, but also being a woman trying to navigate her way in a culture it was an uphill battle. And what struck you about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I remember thinking this throughout the book, that the women were being used, abused, objectified. The crown was placed on the beautiful woman's head because he was using her like a possession. And I thought this flattering words are gifts, but they're dangerous when they don't accompany actions, when they don't lead to truth, when they do not represent what is just and good. And for the women of that period and for us, we can get very caught up in flattery. Oh, your work is so intellectual. Oh, it doesn't even have to be beauty. It could be whatever we feel is our need for flattery, to get caught up in that. And I just thought words and actions go together. It was a little side lesson I felt the reader picked up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that ties right back in with what you said when we first started this episode. And that is this idea that while we may have rights now, we still have a long way to go in many areas. And it's very interesting because there's that difference between, the legal rights. Sure, we're equal. But then in practice, in the arts, in science, do we have that same level of opportunity all the time? I don't think we do.
No.
And so I really thought this was a cool book from that standpoint, that we have this historical context, but you see the parallels with today's context.
And what did you think about some of the men in this book were very
Yeah.
good at hiding who they truly were? And society at that time almost supported their facade and their lies. And I thought, is it interesting that people are not always what they seem, but is it possible to hide one's true identity or evil purpose forever? Or will it eventually come out as it did? I don't want to give spoilers. To some extent in the book, people's true motives were eventually revealed. Is that how it is in the real world?
Yeah, I think no doubt that eventually darkness comes to light. I do believe that. And at this time in history, it was particularly interesting because people were very enamored of these magnates. We had, these very wealthy families, generational type wealth. And it was, you know, kind of celebrities. And they didn't have necessarily, the TV and the movie celebrities like we do today, but the celebrities at the time were these people, these men who were flaunting their wealth in this way. So you could see where people were easily deceived. He dressed well, he collected things, he put on a spectacle and a display for everybody. And that's attractive. So you forgive certain things that don't add up. But eventually, I think those things come out and
I
you're
hope
found out.
so. We want to believe that that's true. And that's what I loved about this book and all historical fiction. They tapped into some real historical truths, but they brought them current so that we could relate to them today. And I really loved it. So, listeners, pick it up. You're going to love it. Two fantastic authors. And I'm going to pique your interest and let you know what's on our radar. A few storm predictions. We have coming Mary Kubica, Michelle Gable, Dervla McTiernan. We have Lisa Unger, Heather Gudenkoff, Liza Palmer, Christopher Reich, Ashley Elston, CJ Box, Amiko Jean, Benjamin Stevenson, and we are excited.
We are. And thank you, listeners. We have listeners in 77 countries now, all 50 states, 1,600 cities. We thank you. We know that you're enjoying these fantastic authors that we're bringing on, but we also know, because we hear from you, that you are enjoying these deep discussions. I mean, today alone, we talked about racism and misogyny and, all kinds of other subjects that flow from those. That's the kind of show we are. And the authors love talking about their books along those lines. So join us. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com. All of our episodes are accessible there. You can find us on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. We've got 125 plus authors. You can click on any one of those and tune in. Until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.